Welcome to Tales from the Trenches Tuesdays. Today I am honored to have Patti Murphy joining me. Patti is the Executive Director of the Youth Services Bureau Charitable Foundation. Together with her team, they raise funds in support of YSB's key programs and ultimately to address the needs of youth in the community in the areas of mental health, housing, employment, and justice. Prior to joining the YSB Foundation in early 2016, Patti was the Director of Communications and Fundraising with the Ottawa Food Bank. She also spent 15 years at Bell, with most of that time dedicated to managing the company's National Employee Giving Program. Patti was born and raised in Ottawa, which I've come to find is a unique thing, and is married with two amazing daughters. Also part of the family is Sam the Welsh Terrier. So welcome, Patti. It's interesting that you spoke about YSB and kind of the makeup of the board and that you want it to be representative of the community. One of my hang-ups, and though it's a bit strange for a guy to be saying this, is I see so many of the staff in the fundraising world. I'd probably say about 3/4 of the staff in any fundraising shop are women. Yet when you get to the C-suite, I would say 75% of the folks in the C-suite are not women, present company excluded, of course. So can you tell me, I see so many times, even the representation of different ethnic groups or different orientations that are there. So many times charities put those ads in the paper, the head and shoulders shot, and they used to be old white men. Mm-hmm. Now, for the most part, it's still white folks. The gender balance is a little bit better, but it's certainly not representative of the greater community. So can you speak to that at all?
Absolutely, and I think that's been an area of focus. It's the same in other sectors, not just nonprofit, but the business world. And sometimes we don't speak to people where they are. We just sort of we send out a blanket request. We post something, board positions available, and it's kind of just very generic. And so, I think for us, and I think we learned this when I was with the Ottawa Food Bank as well, is you have to go and seek people out where they're at. And so just posting the same thing in the same place all the time doesn't always do it. So maybe there is a publication, an online publication, perhaps through Volunteer Ottawa, you're going to tap into, more diversity in terms of folks who are looking for board positions. There's so many different ways in terms of how we're trying to recruit and be representative. Your point about, about the sort of the lack of female representation in executive roles, I'm starting to feel encouraged that that's changing. I feel like I'm starting to see, certainly looking at the Ottawa landscape, more change there. We work so hard to steward our donors. We don't always do the best when it comes to our own succession planning, and I think that's part of a bit of a challenge. Is our auditors might say, by the way, make sure you have a plan for succession planning and that you're having those conversations. And you get audited once a year. You don't want to just keep succession planning in your head for a week or two or 3 weeks or a month when you're in that audit season, as we say. It's got to be part of your practices, just the way we steward our donors through the donor cycle. And I think sometimes we don't do a good job at succession planning and of bringing people along and making sure that they have learning opportunities and supporting them, especially when you're hiring too. Are you hiring just to quickly fill that role that's available, because we're all busy and let's get a seat, someone in that seat ASAP. But I think, stopping and pausing and saying, what skills do we have on our team? Are we being representative of the clients that we're serving? Take that pause and also look at hiring through the lens of succession planning. It's not always possible, because maybe you're hiring for a role that at the time is a bit more entry level, but But there's got to be times when pausing and thinking about succession planning can really serve us well in terms of how do we bring other people along and how do we make room for more of that diversity at the table. For our work, it's really critical when we, if I look across at our management team, our associate directors and directors and coordinators, we have quite a strong representation of our clients now. Is it as well as it should be, as good as it should be? No, but it is a constant conversation for us. And again, I think it is talking to people, where they are, looking for individuals, not just sort of posting it and saying, I really hope that, we attract the right folks that will complement the work that we do. You have to put some effort into it.
Yeah. Good on you for doing that. As well, succession planning is absolutely huge. Especially in the nonprofit world where they say, unless you're in the C-suite, the average tenure of someone is 36 months or less. So I know that you've been blessed with having some longer standing employees. I've had those too in the past, but those are more of the anomalies. Statistics say the average person is going to stay with you for less than 3 years. And then you're like, oh my gosh, how much effort am I going to put into this for someone that's only going to be there for 36 months at best, right?
Right.
So, wow. So one of the things I always ask my guests is a little bit of a fun question. So, we've all been sitting here at home for the last 2 or 3 years, except for you. You've been going to the office for the last couple of years. So many of us are sitting at home and we're trying to figure out what to watch on TV. Luckily, it's football season, so there's great sports to watch. But when it's not sports season, what does Patti watch? What's good?
That's such a good question. So, I've watched a couple of limited series on Netflix that I really, really enjoyed. A smaller, shorter investment, some of them are 6 episodes and you're done. I've got a really odd fascination with the Great Canadian Baking Show. I do like to bake, but I typically avoid any food competition shows. I don't know, to me, food is to be celebrated. It's not a competition. But a friend of mine suggested that I watch it, and it's truly Canadian because honestly, they all help each other. It is a competition, but it's so Canadian. They're all, super funny, but wildly talented, and I've really been enjoying it. And I'll tell you something else. This might sound, kind of odd, Jack, but podcasts I'm loving. I find there's sort of that. You're almost eavesdropping on a conversation. It feels that it's like that intimacy of listening to radio, which I've always enjoyed. And one that I discovered really recently was Anderson Cooper's All There Is. And it's a relatively new podcast. And it sounds a little bit of a downer to say that it's all about loss and grief, but it's so beautifully done and it's so raw and so tenderly approached. It's really beautiful. And, he's at a point in his life where he has young children. He's the only remaining person in his family. So his father passed away when he was quite young. He lost his only brother to suicide. His mother, of course, the very famous Gloria Vanderbilt, just passed away, I think, a little over 3 years ago. He's actually just sold her apartment and he's going through not only his mother's stuff, but his brother's stuff and his dad's stuff. So he's reliving loss times 3. And
I just got bumps.
it is if you listen, honestly, it really, every episode, I think I've listened to 4 so far. There are goosebump moments in each one of those. And again, I don't think you get to be my age where you haven't experienced loss and grief perhaps several times over. It's one of those taboo topics, it's sort of like mental health. We never talked about mental health in the past. We do now, thankfully. And dealing with grief and loss is another one of those, don't talk about it. You're going to upset that person. Well, that person's already thinking about it pretty much all day, when they're in the thick of grief. But it's really, really a lovely podcast to tune into.
So one of the questions I also wanted to ask was a little bit about the fundraising world. So, it's been, and it's kind of my last question. So the fundraising world has been changing all over the place over the last bit. And actually, if you go back in time, it's really a relatively new profession. right? People used to just kind of do it off the side of their desk, especially the Marcom folks. It used to just be, here, you guys go handle the fundraising side. So as you look into the future and the next generation, how do you see fundraising changing, or does it not change?
Well, I think to your point, you're right. There's now the discipline of our fundraising work is there now, and I have two people on my team that have a fundraising diploma. I do not. I come from the communications world, and so I like the fact that we can complement each other, and I learn from them. It's not a one-way street. I learn a lot from those team members, as I do from folks like yourself and other peers that are in the fundraising world. I think that there is a demand now, and I think it will only get stronger. And I've seen it over the course of about the last 10 years, for fundraisers to have some business savvy. Has to be some savviness about just general business understanding. And I think that comes from all of us trying to keep curious about things and to learn about business, at least the basics, right? It doesn't have to be that you're pursuing another degree or anything to that extent, but because you're often going to be working with businesses who are donors, corporate donors, etc. So I think that will become even more important, is that savviness around basic business practices, staying curious. I think the other thing too is, and we're finding that here at YSB, is all of the business expectations are on the charitable sector as well. So you talked about equity, diversity, and inclusion, that whole EDI piece. That cannot just be a policy that each of us just checks off every year when we review our policies. That has to be a practice. It can't be off the side of someone's desk. It has to be more than that if it's authentic. And if it's not authentic, your employees will know. They will tell you. This feels like we're doing it because we have to, but it doesn't feel authentic to me. And it's a piece of work. The whole EDI piece is a piece of work where we started internally with employees to say, we want to make sure we're doing the very best we can with our client base of youth from all different genders and backgrounds and sexual orientations, faith, etc. Help us. What are your experiences here at YSB as an employee, and let's learn from you before we then start, to develop more work around that. So, I think EDI, all of those sorts of, focus areas that are very alive and well in business are very much so in the nonprofit sector. ESG is another one that's coming along. So environmental, social, and governance. How are we impacting those areas as not-for-profits? And you might say, well, we're not an environmental group, so I don't think we touch on that at all. Oh, but actually we do. We have donors whose preferences are to not receive mailed materials, so we're not being wasteful there. We're printing on, recyclable materials. We're trying to minimize our footprint there. Social, we can make some connections there. Governance, of course, as well. So I think it's having that, and like you said, talking to some corporate donors and saying, what are you dealing with outside of your day-to-day that is becoming more and more part of your practice in your company? Great question to ask. Who doesn't love to be asked those questions, right? Help us learn a little bit about what you're doing and that we might adopt, as a nonprofit. So I think those sorts of things will become more and more important and critical for fundraisers as we move forward.
Patti, if folks wanted to get hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
Oh, I'd love that. So definitely reach out. pmurphy@ysb.ca is my email. I would welcome anyone to reach out at any time. And 729-1000 is our number. I'm also on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. So usually it's P Murphy or Patti M. But certainly on social media, I try to be as active as possible. Probably more so in terms of LinkedIn. But by all means, I would encourage folks to reach out. I love to learn, so I also love to learn from others, and that connection works both ways.
Wow. I'll add all of your different handles in the show notes. But Patti, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. It was absolutely one of the best ways to spend a Friday afternoon.
I so agree, Jack, and I'm always up to chatting with you and learning from you as well. So I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Hi, folks. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button right here.